Hello everybody, this is Mr. Wappin coming back at you again. We are continuing to take a look at topic 1.2 for AP Governments, types of democracy. Last time we talked about one of the types of democracies. We call that a participatory democracy, so make sure that you are able to differentiate between a direct democracy and a representative democracy. But we're also going to take a look at a couple of other important theories regarding American democracy, and that's going to be elite theory and pluralist theory. Now, when we talk about elite theory or an elitist democracy, the argument is that even within a participatory democracy, a republic, that in reality, it is a small elite group of people that actually make the decisions in government. That de facto, it's really a very, very, very small group that actually runs the country. And so the argument being is that, what we're really choosing as voters is not a group, is not between a choice of any possible citizen to represent us, but in reality, competing elites. And how are we defining elite? Well, we define elite in this context based on wealth, level of education, things like that. And when we do talk about an elitist democracy or elitism, if you will, this is something, and this might, burst some bubbles in here, but this is actually something that the Founding Fathers in many respects supported. The Founding Fathers themselves were the elites of society at the time. For example, George Washington owned more land than any other individual in the country at that time. John Hancock was, perhaps the wealthiest person of all of New England. I mean, and the list goes on in terms of people that, were the Founding Fathers that were clearly of the elite status. And as we said before, these are folks that are worried about a pure majoritarian style democracy where the vast majority of people do not have much wealth and would therefore use that majoritarian power to take their wealth. So these are folks that, believed in certain principles of a democracy, but they did not want a pure democracy. And in fact, even in this republic, they did not want, the average Jim Bob farmer at the time to actually be a representative in government, particularly. They create a style of government under the Constitution that is designed to try to protect the power of the elites. And there are many different examples of that. For example, even though in the House of Representatives, those members are directly elected by the people, in the Senate at the time of the founding, those were folks that were only chosen by state legislatures. And not a big surprise, state legislatures are going to be made up of members that are of the state level elites. So if you're talking about electing U.S. senators back originally, you're talking about elites choosing other elites to represent them in the Senate. The President of the United States can only be elected with the approval of the Electoral College. Well, who's intended to be in the Electoral College? Initially, it was intended to be made up of elites that would choose a fellow elite to be the president. Federal judges that are going to be appointed by an elite chosen president and confirmed by an elite chosen Senate. So you see that there are many different examples in the Constitution itself in its formation that is designed to promote this sense of elitism. Now, you might say, well, that's just kind of the construction of the government. What about, in reality? Well, in reality, we know that if you look at, especially the higher up you go in the federal government, you're talking about presidents, senators, people like that, these are folks that are overwhelmingly, if you look at their background, they are people of wealth and or very, very elite high education levels. And we can just kind of go through some of these. Yes, you have a Joe Biden that does not particularly come from wealth or status. He went to the University of Delaware and came from a, working class family. But prior to him, you had Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a billionaire whose father was a multi-millionaire who went to the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school. Before that, you had Barack Obama, who, though he does not come from a family of considerable wealth, he comes from a middle-class family, he is Harvard educated. He went to Harvard Law School, one of the most elite schools in the country. Prior to Barack Obama, you have George W. Bush, who comes from a very wealthy family, whose father had been president, whose grandfather had been a U.S. senator. He himself is a Yale graduate, once again another elite Ivy League school. So, you can just go back, there's many, the vast majority of presidents have some sort of elitist tie to them in some way, shape or form. So you can certainly make an argument that, we do operate to some degree with a sense of elitism. The cold hard reality, not that I endorse or support this notion, but, it is much more likely to become president of the United States, if you will, with a Harvard law degree than with an associate's degree in plumbing. That's just the reality. And even though that may kind of put a damper on really what this democracy is all about, you can certainly make an argument that that is what the founders kind of intended on some level, like it or not. Now, another important theory that kind of describes American government is pluralism. And what pluralism basically means is that, the word plural meaning many, is that in our country, in our republic, we're talking about a government that is really organized and run by not particularly individuals, but by competing interest groups. Now, we'll talk in much more depth later on this year about what interest groups are and the different types of interest groups that exist out there. But suffice to say, an interest group is an organization made up of like-minded people that attempt to try to influence government to promote policies that they perceive are beneficial to their own needs or interests, hence the term interest group. And so the argument is that in a pluralist-style democracy, it's not the individual that has power. That you as an individual, you go out, you vote, you do whatever. Maybe you're upset about something, you send President Biden an email. Well, if you're the only person that sends an email with that type of concern, I hate to break it to you folks, but that email is going to get discarded in our reality. It's not going to be addressed because you're one out of 320 plus million people. However, according to pluralism, if you are part of a bigger group, a group that has, perhaps 100,000 members nationally, that have a similar concern, and that concern might be, regulations on handguns, or it might be, suppression of voting rights for African Americans, or, it might be, minimum wage laws and stuff like that, that by joining some type of interest group, then you have collective power. And these interest groups compete with one another to try to influence and create policy. And this is seen as generally a positive thing in a democracy because, the idea being is that in a democracy, policy really should be, and note policy meaning the actions of government, policy really should be the how can I put this? Like, it is generally considered like the best middle ground consensus that you can build from competing interests. So in other words, from numerous different competing ideas, you can then flesh out what is going to be the best idea in terms of policy to address a certain problem, situation, etc. So the idea being is that as an individual, you have much more power by joining a group like the NRA, the National Rifle Association, or the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NOW, the National Organization of Women, or the AFL-CIO, America's largest labor union, that by doing that, by joining these groups with this collective association of power and shared interests, you then have real influence in our democracy. Now, later on this year, we'll talk about the downside of pluralism, something known as hyperpluralism, but at least suffice to say for the moment, be mindful of what pluralism is. So as we kind of round out this portion, when we do talk about the different types of democracies that exist out there, be able to understand that when we talk about American democracy, it's not singularly one thing. That American democracy is a republic that does have some opportunities for direct democracy in it. You can certainly argue that it has a strong elitist component to it, but that's not to say that you can't come from humble origins to become a person of power. Hence, Joe Biden's an example of that. And at the same time, as much as we stress individual participation, be it through voting, donating money, registering people to vote, organizing protest marches, whatever, it's also a pluralist democracy that relies on the formation and competition of powerful interest groups to try to get their goals achieved. Okay? So be able to identify the differences amongst these different theories regarding American democracy and how they fit into that larger context. Okay? We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.